And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show. It is Wednesday, January 15th. I am Josh Engleman, here to break down an 11-game slate, 9 games on DraftKings. They have dropped the 10 and the 10:30 for tonight, but now we are here. So I would like you guys to hit the like button if you can, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman. Whew. Interesting morning. Very interesting morning. But we're here now. So, 2 things happened this morning. All on me. Well, not all on me, but the first one, got to 8:30, set an alarm. I finished up what I was doing, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take the dogs out, let them go to the bathroom before I come up here and do the strategy show and record contenders. Let the dogs out. Immediately, my older dog barking and sprinting directly around the corner of the house, out of sight. Turns out, yard guys here spraying into the backyard. Didn't know. Went very well. Riggs immediately just wanted to get pet, and the puppy had no interest other than jumping all over him and being happy. So crisis averted there. Got back in the house, came upstairs, and then I realized that I was on projections this morning. I read the calendar wrong, thought I had Friday. Turns out I had today. So I had to scramble to get projections and ownership up onto the site for myself. So that is why I ended up being just a tad late here. I had to run all of this stuff and get all the model updated, and I was not prepared for that. So we ended up being a couple minutes late. Oh well, doesn't matter. We're not going anywhere today. And even more importantly, there is an NFL strategy show at 10, which means we are going to have to pick up the pace. I didn't think there was an NFL show today. Clearly I was wrong. But I've got all the data now. We are going to move pretty quickly. And also, the most important piece here is that there's not a lot to talk about. It's a 9-gamer, so we can focus most of our attention on the best possible plays. We don't have to dig into any of the off the beaten path dudes. Let's see, Choke Hold'em. What did I used to do for work? So prior, I don't have a ton of time for this, but we can be quick. Prior to starting at Stokastic, I was working for a CRO, so a company that does clinical trials, but the whole package of it all. I had nothing to do with any of that. I was in the biostats and programming department, and I managed the financials for the biostats and programming piece of a clinical trial. And then prior to that, I was in standard banking. Oh, alrighty. Man, it's a shame. I had 30% of Edwards last night. That went well. In the scramble, I didn't realize I didn't have enough of Jeff Doughton. I only got to 8 or 9%. And that was not a goal, but I just simply ran out of time. And I'm not saying that just because he played well. Those were just the guys that I wanted to make sure that I had. I had a ton of Reggie Jackson. That was going to happen one way or the other. But anyway, let's get into it. So, first game up. And this one's basically impossible to talk about on one side. That's going to be the New York Knicks. Currently, 5.5-point favorites in Philly, 218 total. We do have a Q tag on Karl Anthony Towns for this one. Towns, he's been questionable a lot lately, so we'll see how that ends up. Jericho Sims, technically questionable as well. Now, there is no ownership coming into the Knicks. 218 total, one of the lower totals on the slate. It's the second lowest pace game on the slate. Now, if Towns is out, obviously we'll create a little bit of value. But highest owned guy on the Knicks, 6% to Brunson. I did have OG Anunoby just barely get over that 10% optimal rate. But everybody else, Brunson's 9, Bridges is 9, Towns and Hart are 6. This is the same situation we always know for the Knicks. You want to play somebody from the starting lineups? Totally get it. Bridges, Hart, Anunoby, Towns, Brunson, they're all in play. I would argue that Anunoby to me looks like the best option, but best is very relative. None of these guys are priorities on the slate, and there's really not too much to say about the Knicks for this one. You want to go to any one of those starters, I get it. But I don't have too much to dig into on the Knicks. We know what we're getting here. And it's just Knicks starters playing a bunch. Now, the problem in this game comes from the Philly side. The 76ers are on a back-to-back. Maxey didn't play yesterday. Paul George didn't play yesterday. Caleb Martin didn't play yesterday. Andre Drummond didn't play yesterday. Embiid didn't play yesterday. You know what we got out of the Sixers yesterday? I have no idea what we're getting today. So I have Maxey in. I have Paul George in. I have Martin in. I have Embiid in. I have Drummond in. If that's the case, none of these guys look all that good. You want to play a $9,500 Joel Embiid? I get it. Particularly against Towns on the opposite side. You know, if anything's going to get Joel Embiid up for a game, it's going at Cat. But we need to know who's available for Philly. We won't get their injury report until 1:30. I'm guessing we still have some Q tags on some of these guys. So it's really impossible to dig in too much here to Philly. Just understand, we're waiting on a lot here. We're waiting on a lot. All right. So I have nothing else to add for Philly. We need to know who's actually playing. I hope that's understandable. And the most likely scenario, if these guys are in, is that we're not playing the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, Boston Celtics. 2 touchdown favorites in Toronto. 229 total. Celtics don't have anybody on the injury report. The Raptors will be without Emmanuel Quickley. And Jacoby Walter is now with the G League team. No ownership coming into Boston. Slight pace down spot, but ultimately, it's a lot like the Knicks. When these guys are fully healthy, it's really hard to prioritize anything from these teams. I mean, Drew Holiday's 7% owned. Jason Tatum's 4%. Those are the highest numbers on the DraftKings side. You can see in my optimal rates, and I can stretch that column a little bit and stretch that column a little bit. You can see very quickly that nobody crossed the 10% optimal mark. Tatum got to 9. Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday both got to 8. But this is just like the Knicks, only even more extreme. These guys are not very playable. But if you're playing a large field GPP, Tatum, Brown, White, Holiday, Porzingis, any one of those 5 guys is completely reasonable to have in a lineup. I just wouldn't be prioritizing a single thing from Boston. I just don't see how you do it. Now, on the Toronto side, no Quickley does matter a little bit. Unfortunately for Toronto, it doesn't matter enough to make these guys look any good. Even without Quickley, the highest owned guy on Toronto is 6% to Jakob Poeltl. Everybody's below that, both sites. This is a massive pace down spot for Toronto. I have them losing 3.5 possessions below their average, and they're running into a Boston defense that, while people understand it's not going great for Boston's defense, it's still one of the best defenses. Like, I know people are sort of mentally down on the Celtics D. They're 7th in the league. They're still really, really good. So, you know, you want to play Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, Jake Puddle, because this matchup is, you know, maybe it stays close. One of those guys probably doing something. Other than that, I mean, for the first 4 teams we've talked about, Knicks, Sixers, Celtics, Raptors, these are all 7:30 starts, by the way. Oh, yeah, I guess I should mention, Lock is not at 7 tonight. Lock is at 7:30. Let's see. Where is it here? Yeah, wait. No. Knicks Philly is at 7. My apologies. For some reason, the Basketball Reference schedule has this game at 7:30. So that game does start at 7. But the first 2 games of the night suck. They just do. They just do. So Knicks Philly at 7. You're not going to be playing much of it, probably. Boston Toronto at 7:30. You're not going to be playing much of it. News God, I feel great. Like, I've had a really productive morning. I was up at 5:30, got the dogs out, did all of my prep super early, grabbed a shower, cleaned up the downstairs. I mean, it was a productive morning. This would feel so much smoother if I didn't just simply forget to do the projections. And I had an hour to get that done, and I just didn't do it because I forgot. But now we're getting into the things that we want to talk about. And the first game that we have of anybody getting any sort of love is going to be the Atlanta Hawks. Those Hawks are 2-point dogs in Chicago, 244 total. And the reason this game looks as interesting as it does is because of the pace. The Chicago Bulls are the second fastest team in the league at 104.4 possessions. Atlanta is third at 104.4 possessions. So this is the fastest matchup on the day. It's the highest total on the day. And we do have Atlanta on the back-to-back, which will complicate matters. Chicago also on the back-to-back, which won't help. But assuming we are getting a full-strength Atlanta team, save for Jalen Johnson, because we didn't have DeAndre Hunter yesterday. 25% ownership is coming into Trae Young. 15 is coming into Dyson Daniels. 20 to Bogdan Bogdanovic. And then you're getting scattered ownership to Vit Krejci, Risa Shea, Okongwu coming off of his monster day yesterday. Relatively light ownership to Capella. Garrison Matthews is getting a little bit of love as well. So we are going to need the injury report for sure. Trae Young looks good. I had a decent chunk of him yesterday. He played quite well. 24% ownership might be a tad high for what this slate is, but certainly should be in that 15 to 20 range, no less. Dyson Daniels, I have very little interest in from the DraftKings side. People get to him on FanDuel. He's over-owned there to me as well. If Bogdanovic is in, 4,600 shooting guard, small forward eligibility, great flexibility. Don't expect him to be 25% owned, but in that 15 to 20 range is where he probably will be. Okongwu looks better than Capella. $400 cheaper. Slightly more owned. I don't think these guys look all that dissimilar. Capella could always grab an extra minute or two. But yeah, I'd happily get 10 to 15% of Okongwu. But getting those guys right is difficult. We certainly got Okongwu right yesterday. Vit Krejci had too much ownership yesterday because of Hunter being out. That went well for Vit Krejci. He's a terrible per minute guy. I don't have a ton of interest. Risa Shea's not the guy if Hunter is in. Hunter looks okay, assuming he plays. I think the priorities for Atlanta are very clearly Trae Young. And then to me, my second option would be Bogdan Bogdanovic. The fact that Okongwu has power forward eligibility on FanDuel, very helpful. Very helpful. But we needed this injury report. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Bogdan Bogdanovic doesn't play the back-to-back. He was questionable heading into yesterday. It's not out of the realm of possibility that DeAndre Hunter doesn't play today. Did miss yesterday, but I assume he does. So there is some stuff up in the air for Atlanta, but they are one of the 4 teams that are getting ownership. Basically, and I'm just going to sum this up. Atlanta, the Pelicans, the Spurs, and the Jazz are all pulling ownership right now. North of 100%. Everybody else is like 15 to 20. Now, this will change throughout the day for sure, but there are a couple teams that we are definitely focusing on for what we have today. How many rebounds did Sabonis end up with yesterday? Only 10. Yeah, of course I talked that one in. Knew that was going to happen. Absolutely knew that was going to happen. Now, on the opposite side for Chicago, we're not going to have Lonzo Ball today. And allegedly, we're supposed to have Ayo Dosunmu, so I have him projected in. Zach LaVine up to 8,600 on DraftKings. He is 12% owned. He's the only guy that got into double-digit ownership across the Bulls on either FanDuel or DraftKings. Vooch, White, Giddey, all in that like 5% range. And that's how I see it. I mean, I would argue Zach LaVine is a hair over-owned, but the up-tempo matchup here is certainly going to help. I don't have a problem getting to Zach LaVine, but 10% is probably about right. Vooch, White, Giddey, they're the guys that you would want to go to. To me, they just look like slightly lesser versions of the Knicks or the Celtics. So it's really, LaVine is the guy that you're going to pay attention to. I don't even think you're going to be paying attention to him that much. But, I mean, obviously, this is a game that has the opportunity to have a monster day. Slim Lancaster says, I think the field is sleeping on Giddey. He's been padding stats lately. I think Ayo Dosunmu coming back might complicate that a little bit because that will depends on how healthy he gets. But when Dosunmu is around, it's a lot more likely that Josh Giddey doesn't close games. When Dosunmu is out, it's a lot more likely that Giddey can get those closing minutes. So pay attention to that. I don't know how stretched out Dosunmu can be, but I am at least a little nervous that he could cut into Giddey. All right, Orlando Magic. Now, the Magic are 6-point underdogs in Milwaukee, 210.5 total. This is the lowest total on today's slate. It is the third lowest pace on today's slate. We do not know the status of KCP. He is questionable. Jet Howard is doubtful. Obviously, no Suggs or Franz or Mo Wagner or Gary Harris. Franz, though, starting to get back. Might be seeing him in the next week or two, which is nice. Goga, also questionable for this one. Now, there is essentially no ownership coming into the Orlando Magic. 2% to Goga is the most, save for one guy. And that one guy is Cole Anthony. And he appears to be the only person that we are going to pay attention to on the Orlando Magic today, assuming KCP and Goga both play. If for some reason Goga ends up out, $4,500 Wendell Carter Jr. is going to look pretty damn good. So file that one away in your brains. But Cole Anthony was 14% optimal for me, 30% boom, goal score 40. So a 30% chance of scoring 40 fantasy points would be what we're looking for. The minutes appear to be there right now. He's playing north of 30 pretty regularly. It's going to be a shame when he gets ripped out of the rotation when everybody gets back. But I think that Cole Anthony ownership is perfectly reasonable. We have not seen any major numbers outside of Atlanta. Otherwise, everybody else is pretty low owned across everything we've talked about. Cole Anthony's not that guy. He's going to be someone we're paying attention to all day. And Orlando has the better side of this matchup for sure. But if KCP's in, I don't want him. If Goga's in, I don't want him. 9,100 for Paolo Banchero is still going to be pretty tough. John Isaac's minutes are starting to fluctuate, but on a slate like this, I'm not entirely sure we're going to be locking him in this early, just on a lark. We do have 4 games starting at 8, so we will have some flexibility if you have him, but I think this is Cole Anthony for Orlando and Cole Anthony only. Smitch says, what happened to Markelle Fultz? He's not in the league. No one signed him. Pour one out for Markelle Fultz. Kind of sad. So the Milwaukee side, kind of impossible to talk about. Bucks are on the back-to-back, so we don't technically know their injury report. They were without Gary Trent yesterday. I don't know if Chris Middleton is going to play this back-to-back. I mean, we can't even necessarily be confident that Giannis plays this game. Ivan says, as a C's fan, I remember when people were pissed that we drafted Tatum over Fultz. Yeah, that worked out, but I mean, coming out, Fultz was the dude. He really was. It was not crazy to prefer Markelle Fultz to Jason Tatum in that moment. He was a legitimate number 1 pick. It just did not work out. So for Milwaukee, no ownership, No surprise here coming into Milwaukee. Dame's getting nothing. The rest of these guys that are all awful clearly aren't getting anything. Only guy that's getting any love is Giannis. He's 10% owned. I had him 11% optimal. 25% chance of scoring 68, which was the target score for him today. That's a big number, and it's certainly not the best matchup for Giannis, but I don't care too much about that. 10% honestly might be a hair low, but, we've got Wemby, we've got Jokic, so we have some real pay-ups today. But if you're getting to anything from Milwaukee, assuming he plays, it's absolutely Giannis. You want to roll the dice on Dame? Sure, he's going to look like all the Knicks dudes, all the Boston dudes. But this game is essentially two guys that you would prioritize. Cole Anthony and Giannis. Two very similar guys, right? Yikes. Grizzly. It's not that I replaced it, I just hid it. It's here. I started setting up a positional formula this morning. So I just wanted to get that on there for myself. But they're there. They're just hidden. They just didn't need to be there. All right. We're through 4 games. We're at the halfway point. Let me hit the schedule for the rest of the day first. NFL strategy show, as I learned 5 minutes ago, will be coming up at 10 a.m. That'll be Laffy and Greg. The deeper dive will be myself and Spags today at 5 o'clock. Greg and Eric will be on Live Before Lock at 6 o'clock. And myself and Greg will be on playback, watching games, talking ownership, talking swaps, talking bets, talking whatever. We'll be there at 7. You go to playback.tv/Stokastic. You can come on in, watch the games with us. If you have a League Pass account, it just links up. This is all free, by the way. If you have League Pass, it links up. We all watch the games together. It's a really awesome experience. If you don't, we have 20 VIP passes that we could hand out so that you guys can see the games. Worst case scenario, it's just like a strategy show or Live Before Lock. You just see our faces and you'll have chat, and we'll be breaking down everything we see. So come on in. It's a great place to be for news. It's basically like a second Live Before Lock, because we're going to hit everything that's popping up in that hour. We're going to talk about how that's impacting ownership, what swaps we can make, all that good stuff. So if you haven't watched playback with us, you should. All right, Golden State Warriors. Man, they are 5.5-point dogs in Minnesota, 215 total. This is a relatively low total for the slate. And one of the slower games, the Warriors lose 2.7 possessions below their average in this spot. Now, Kyle Anderson is questionable. Draymond is questionable. Still no Pajemski. Still no Kuminga. Gary Payton probable. He's back after a while. And Trace Jackson-Davis is probable. There is no ownership coming into the Warriors outside of 10% on both sites to Draymond Green. On DraftKings, he's 5,700 power forward center eligible, right around a fantasy point per minute. And I had him 8% optimal, very clearly the most optimal. Is this a 9:30 game, Steven? Are all my times wrong? I will start this. I'll stop talking about the Warriors if that's true. All of these times are wrong. What the hell, Basketball Reference? All right. Got the first two right. Hawks game's at 8. Magic game is at 8. Warriors game not at 8. This is at 9:30. Mavs game is at 8. Memphis Grizzlies game is at 8. Rockets 9. Charlotte 9. Miami 10. Nets Clippers 10:30. I don't know why. They must have moved that game. Weird. All right, I'm gonna bail back out of that Golden State game, and we're gonna go to Dallas and New Orleans instead. We'll hit Golden State as the final game. Stupid Basketball Reference messing with my schedule today. Don't need that. All right, remix. Game 5, Dallas Mavericks, 2-point favorites in New Orleans, 226 total. From what we understand, Kyrie Irving will be playing today. They're on a back-to-back. The Pelicans are on a back-to-back. So we are making some educated guesses. Assuming Kyrie is in, and assuming that we are not getting Derek Lively, and I don't see how we would be getting Derek Lively today. Seems like that dude's not going to be playing. Just me. But left with the ankle sprain yesterday, so I assume he's not playing. So we're going to get Daniel Gafford starting. No one's getting any ownership. Gafford should be. He's 4,300, center only. I have him 11% optimal, 30% chance of 31 fantasy points. He's not going to be 4% owned. He'll be probably 10 to 15. So don't think of him as under-owned right now. That number will just come up throughout the day. Steven, thanks for pointing that out, by the way. That was going to drive me nuts. So Gafford is going to be the guy that we have our eye on for Dallas because we are expecting Derek Lively is not going to be here. But for the rest of Dallas, I don't want a $9,300 Kyrie if he's going to be limited, especially on a back-to-back. All these other guys, your Najee Marshalls, your Clays, your Grimes, your Dinwiddies, your PJ Washingtons, they're all priced accordingly. So I don't see anything that we would want to get to for Dallas outside of Daniel Gafford, assuming Daniel Gafford is starting at center. For the Pels, we've got a little bit of ownership coming into Jeremiah Robinson Earl right now. Going with the assumption that Zion will not be playing this back-to-back, and going with the assumption that Jeremiah Robinson Earl would be starting at the power forward spot in Zion's place, which we have seen. In theory, it could be Javonte Green. In theory, it could be one of the guards. I went Earl to start. Don't get bogged down on this. We're going to need this information. Maybe the assumptions will change. But he's the flat 3K power forward center. So don't overreact too much to the 87% ownership. But assuming JRE is starting, he's going to look amazing. Now, he doesn't have to start. Even if you're giving him 20 to 24 minutes, that's going to be a decent enough value at the flat 3K. If you're giving him the starter minutes that he's seen, he's going to be probably the best play on the slate. So be aware of that. I think Murphy, Murray, McCollum, all guys that should be probably in that 8 to 12% owned range. So I think there's some value actually on the New Orleans Pelicans today, but we need their injury report more than anything. Just keep in mind, the best value play of the day just might be Jeremiah Robinson Earl, assuming he starts. Whether or not he starts, a very different discussion. So we want to think that through just a hair. So Zion missed on the 8th and the 10th. We only got about 20 minutes out of JRE on both of those days. He started the 8th. He didn't start the 10th. What they do here is probably up in the air. I probably over-projected JRE a little bit in this spot and under-projected Javonte Green, which I'm going to go ahead and correct right now. So let's get Javonte Green more minutes. Let's take JRE down to 24. Learning it as we go. But even still, in 24 minutes for JRE, I got him at a 6.8x value. That's basically the best value that exists on the slate today. Memphis, San Antonio. Triple J versus Wemby. Sign me up for this one. Grizzlies are 3-point favorites in San Antonio, 239 total. No ownership coming into the Grizz. Pace down spot. Although, even though it's a pace down spot, this is still a really fast matchup overall. Second fastest matchup. Second highest total on today's slate. But it's the Grizzlies. So, you want to roster Triple J to try to get different? He's 2% owned. I could understand it. Ja played 37 minutes last time out. I only went 31 here. He's the only guy getting any love at 7% ownership. I have him 10% optimal, 25% boom. I would argue that Ja Morant at 8,500 is under-owned here. And he would be the guy that I would want to keep my eye on the most. I don't want anything from Memphis other than Triple J or Ja Morant. Those would be the only two options. But I think Ja Morant, assuming he's 7% owned, is very sneaky. I think Ja Morant today looks very similar to what De'Aaron Fox looked like yesterday. That's sort of how I'm looking at this one. But I don't know how you go to anything else here. Wells, Edey, Clark, Aldama. They're all no's. They're all no's to me. Savage Styles. He's not that big of a foul guy anymore, man. 3 fouls in 1 second for Triple J. He's not that guy anymore. He's like an average foul dude now. It's been a long time since those first couple years. But yeah, I really like Ja in GPPs if he's maintaining this low ownership. And then I like rolling the dice on Triple J because he's just really awesome. It's kind of crazy. I read about this yesterday. I didn't really realize it. Memphis is in a little bit of trouble with Triple J moving forward. His contract situation is going to put him in a spot where he's basically going to be unable to extend with Memphis. So he'll have to reach free agency. And the big part of him reaching free agency, because obviously Memphis does not want him to leave. And if Triple J can get to free agency, there's going to be a lot of teams doing whatever they can to free up enough money to max him out. But here's the problem. Because of the way that his contract is set up, an extension is basically impossible. He's under contract next year for $23.4 million. The extension on that deal would not be something that Triple J would ever accept. So he's going to have to hit free agency after next year, is my expectation. What Memphis really needs is for Triple J to either win Defensive Player of the Year or make an All-NBA team. Because if they do that, then they have the ability to supermax him. And if they can supermax him, that would be what would keep him in Memphis if he becomes a free agent. Because then they can offer a staggering sum to him well north of what anybody else could offer him. But for an extension, they can only offer him an amount that he would definitely say no to. So I know nobody cares about this during this show, but it is interesting. Jaren Jackson Jr. Needs to make All-NBA this year. So shout out to Keith Smith of Spot Track. All right, let's go to the Spurs side here. Now, this side is getting a ton of ownership, and it should. 40% ownership to Victor Wembanyama, 11,200. You know, do I think it's a little high given some of the other pay-ups here? Yeah, and I expect it to come down to like the 30s, but he looks awesome. 4.1 possessions above their average. This is a massive pace-up spot for San Antonio. I want to get as much Wemby as I can, and he's going to look better than Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he's going to look better than Nikola Jokic because of this matchup. So if you're looking for the best pay-up today, the best pay-up is Victor Wembanyama. We're getting 20% ownership to Devin Vassell. Shooting guard, small forward, 6K. It was my second most optimal play. You're looking for 40 fantasy points out of him. I don't think 20% ownership for Vassell is crazy at all. Jeremy Sohan is out for this one. With Jeremy Sohan out, Stephon Castle will start. Stephon Castle is the dude. I would argue that if it's not JRE starting for the Pels, Stephon Castle is the number one play of the day. He's point guard, shooting guard eligible. He's 4K. I gave him 30 minutes. He's 50% owned. He was 26% optimal for me with a 44% chance of scoring 29 fantasy points. So the guy that I want the most from San Antonio is Stephon Castle. The guy I want to pay up for the most is Victor Wembanyama. I want to use Devin Vassell. I want to use the Barnacle of the Bay as an ownership pivot. He's only 6% owned. I'd like to use a little bit of Chris Paul at 6,100. He's only 7% owned. I think 15 would be pretty reasonable here. But the starting five for San Antonio are either chalk plays that look exceptional or some ownership pivots that I think people need to pay attention to. And I think you could even roll the dice on someone like Keldon Johnson at 4,300. On the off chance that it's not working out all that well for Castle, I think Keldon Johnson could see an extra minute or two. But the Spurs look amazing. The Spurs are my favorite team of the slate. They have the highest optimal. They have the highest boom. These are the guys I want. Everybody in that starting five for the San Antonio Spurs. The Houston Rockets are in a really nice one here. 1.5 point favorites in Denver. 231 total. Now, there is no ownership coming into Houston, which shouldn't be all that surprising. Jabari Smith, still out. Tari Eason, obviously, still doubtful. There's no ownership coming in here. 9% to Jalen Green, 8% to Alperen Şengün. Houston is like the Knicks or like Boston. You want to play a starter? I can understand it. You want to get 10% of Jalen Green, 10% of Van Vliet, 10% of Amin Thompson, 10% of Dylan Brooks, 10% of Şengün. All of that makes sense to me. You want to try and hope you get a Cam Whitmore value day? He's worth 5%. I have no priority from Houston. I would say Jalen Green looks the best, but I don't think that anybody looks great. This is another spot where it's starters and basically nothing else. I love this Houston team. I'm fascinated by what they do at the deadline. And that is coming up soon, guys. 3 or 4 weeks. You know where I'll be. Right here for hours on end. But I certainly like multiple starters here for Houston. The problem is they've got 100% total boom, which means you're expecting one of those main 6 guys to have a score that you would need. Houston needs KD. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly disagree on that one. I mean, yeah, they need KD. I don't disagree with getting a really good basketball player, but if you're Houston, you don't go after Kevin Durant. That is short-sighted for a team that has one of the better long-term outlooks of any team in the league. So on the Denver side, Nuggets on a back-to-back. I'm assuming that Aaron Gordon is going to sit today. Not necessarily going to happen, but that's my expectation. I did project him in for right now. If he's out, we're going to be a lot more interested in Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther. The only guy getting any ownership right now for Denver is Nikola Jokic, just north of 25%. He's 12,300. He clearly looks great. It's Jokic. He's a threat for a high-level triple-double every time he's out there. I have him 15% optimal, 35% chance of scoring 71 fantasy points. So I personally would really like to get to Nikola Jokic, but I'm going to be honest. I think Victor Wembanyama looks better. I think Jokic and Giannis are sort of that next tier after Wemby. Westbrook's okay. MPJ's okay. Jamal Murray after yesterday is okay. The Gordon news will matter, though. We're going to need this injury report. But if Gordon's out, that frees up a lot of minutes for Peyton Watson and Julian Strawther. And if we can get north of 30 minutes again on Watson at 4,100, even as a not great per minute guy, he will be someone we want to pay attention to. The Charlotte Hornets. 6-point favorites in Utah, 221 total. Now, we are getting a little bit of love here for the Hornets. Same guys that are normally available to Charlotte are available. For Utah, no Jordan Clarkson, no John Collins, no Johnny Juzang, no Lauri Markkanen, no Colin Sexton out for rest. Keontae George is questionable. Elijah Harkless is questionable. The Utah side of this one's wild, but they're getting owned like crazy. Now, the Charlotte side, 15% ownership to a 10K LaMelo. It's totally reasonable to me. 11% optimal, 26% chance of 60 fantasy points. Looks like another really reasonable pay-up. Looks very similar to Trae Young, honestly. And then 6,100, Mark Williams got to 10% ownership. I would argue that's a little too high, but I love the matchup against Utah. I mean, Charlotte being a favorite in Utah is kind of wild. I have no issue whatsoever getting to a little bit of Mark Williams, but he's not a priority to me. LaMelo would be the guy that I would want the most here. Mitchell, KD to Denver for Porter Jr. in pieces. Denver doesn't have enough pieces. If KD's going somewhere, Denver can't compete with that deal. That would be amazing for Denver. If I'm Denver, I would do that. But that's not going to get it done. They wouldn't have the ability to get him. Now, the Utah side. I said they're getting a lot of ownership, but that's mostly two people. And those two people are Bryce Sensabaugh and Keontae George. Because they're missing 2/3 of their team, and some of the guys are questionable. Like, if Keontae George is back and starting, he's 5,500 at point guard, and their three biggest offensive players aren't here today. There is no Markkanen, there is no Clarkson, there is no Sexton. So Keontae George is going to look pretty damn good. He's north of 40% ownership. I assume he will be heavily owned if he is in, and he's very highly optimal for me. Similar story. By all accounts, Bryce Sensabaugh is just going to play decent minutes. And if Keontae George happens to be out, he'll play even more. I gave Sensabaugh 26 minutes. If he's playing 26 minutes, he's one of the best plays of the day. 50% owned. I have him 20% optimal. 32% chance of 32 fantasy points. That's all you need at 4,500 for a small forward, power forward eligible guy. So you're going to get to Keontae George if he's in, and he's going to look great. You're going to get to Bryce Sensabaugh. He's going to look good no matter what. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that we like even more here if George isn't back. And I think, rostering someone like Walker Kessler, Isaiah Collier, potentially like Kyle Filipowski, there are other options for Utah. But the priorities are George and Sensabaugh, at least as of right now. Who can the Timberwolves get? Are they going to trade away Conley? I'd be surprised if they traded away Mike Conley. They don't really have much ability to make any sort of real deals. Honestly, if they were going to trade someone, I think the most likely scenario would be Julius Randle. But the Wolves don't exactly have a ton of assets. They do need somebody. I'm just not entirely sure they have the assets to do it. Mitchell, I don't think you're understanding how trades work all that much. That's just salary. It's not that somebody has to want Mike Conley. Conley also only making $10 million. So not really much of an asset. They don't really have anybody that's imminently tradable. They don't have much salary ballast. Like if you did Conley and Randall, you can get up to like $43 million if you were trying to really go get somebody. But they don't have the salary to do anything. And they're going to have some decisions to make because they're probably going to end up having to let Nickeil Alexander-Walker leave in the offseason. So, if you're trying to trade him now, can you get a different guard for somewhere around $13 million for Conley and Walker? Maybe? I don't know. All right, final game. I tried to talk about it before. We've already essentially touched on it. By the way, when I say final game, I mean final game on the DraftKings slate. Warriors 5.5 point dogs in Minnesota. We need the Q-tag status for Draymond. If he's in, he's probably the only guy from the Warriors we're going to roster. 10% owned, close to 10% optimal. I really don't have any interest in anybody else for the Warriors. Could Steph be in a lineup? Sure. No priority. There's no priorities for Golden State. But if Draymond is in, he's a 10% guy. He's a 10% guy. For Minnesota, Julius Randle, oddly enough, 14% owned. That will come down. None of these guys should be north of 10%. You're getting around 8% optimal for Edwards, Gobert, Randall, McDaniels, and Reed. Any one of those Minnesota guys makes sense to me in that Edwards, Gobert, Randall, McDaniels, DiVincenzo, Reed group. Conley at 3,800 isn't crazy. It's not fun. But I don't think Ant is overowned in any way. Randall is to me slightly overowned. Could always play a $4,500 Jaden McDaniels. But there's just not a lot to like here for Minnesota. The teams that we're paying attention to are Utah, San Antonio, the Pelicans, and the Hawks, at least as of right now. Yeah, Slim, yeah, I would agree that Gobert's a little underowned as well. It's just, if there's 50 centers every day, it makes it kind of difficult. Not ideal. If you think Draymond's been asked for years, Nikki, you would be quite mistaken. Quite mistaken. I mean, we're talking about a high-level defensive player. Gonna tell me he's ass on offense? I can get behind that. But as a basketball player, ass would be not the way I would describe him. I mean, even last year, he was still one of the best defensive players in basketball. All right, final 2 games. Hit that like button if you haven't done it yet. Would help out. He's bad for the team locker room. Wow. Tell that to all the rings on his fingers. Miami Heat, 5-point dogs in Los Angeles, taking on the Lakers, 217 total. This is actually the slowest paced game on the slate. Now, for FanDuel, we're getting about 20% ownership to Terry Rozier, around 10 to Nikola Jovic and Jaime Jaquez. We do have a Q tag on Bam Adebayo. So obviously we know what we want to do if Bam happens to be out, and that will be play. Oh, wow. Kel'el Ware is 5,500 on FanDuel. So they priced him up already. Yeah, you probably won't be getting much of Ware either, but that would be the guy you'd go to if Bam happens to be out. But, does Jaquez look okay around 10%? Yeah. Should Hero be 5 to 10? Yeah. Should you be prioritizing anything else from Miami? No, not really. How many years ago was he winning rings? I mean, they won the title in 2022, man. Not that many years ago. What are you talking about? Why are we pretending like they didn't just win one of the most recent titles in the league? There's only been 3 champions in the last 3 years, and Golden State is one of them. All right, Lakers side. So for the Lakers, Dorian Finney-Smith, doubtful for personal reasons, but AD probable, LeBron probable. We're not getting much ownership here for the Lakers. It is a massive pace down spot against Miami. Around 5% ownership to Reeves, around 10 for AD, around 10 for LeBron, just shy of 10 for Max Christie and Rui. I think Rui's a little sneaky with no Dorian Finney-Smith around. And then, Max Christie, LeBron, AD, and Reeves should all be about 10% owned. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing exciting. Revenge narrative alert, I guess, for LeBron. And finally, Brooklyn Nets, LA Clippers. Nets are on a back-to-back. I have no idea who's playing for them. We didn't know who was playing for them yesterday until 30 minutes before the game. Do we have Claxton? I don't know. Do we have any of their real dudes today? I don't know. We're going to need their injury report at the very least. I've probably already spent too much time on the Clippers. Will we find value there? We certainly might. Can we talk about it right now? Absolutely not. And then finally for the Clippers, these guys are impossible to roster right now. Kawhi back, playing 20 minutes a night. They stretch their rotation out. Outside of Powell and Harden and Zoo, nobody plays 30 minutes. The rest of their guys are terrible per minute guys. You want to get a little bit of Powell or Harden. I get it. I don't know how you prioritize anything from the Clippers. What we really need there are the Brooklyn Nets news. They are 14-point dogs in LA. Started a little late, had some bouncing around to do, but we got through all 11 games. Contenders is going to get recorded in a couple minutes, so keep your eyes peeled for that. NFL Strategy Show coming up next. So thank you guys for being here. Another great strategy show in the books. Enjoy your hump day, everybody. Sign up at Stokastic. Link in the description.